Thank you very much. I have had some great sponsors, and that's part of the reason why I'm here. I've played the odds, so I've had a lot of sponsors, and therefore I've had some great ones in there. My sobriety date was July 14th, 2002, so I've been sober 18 years. I got sober when I was 25. I'm 44 now. My home group is the morning meditation group of Alcoholics Anonymous. It meets 7 days a week on Zoom and in person. It's a meditation meeting. We meditate for 5 minutes, and then we go around and share the insights that we got during our meditation. I'm trying to think what else. This morning I got up. I worked in order. The first step, the third step, the seventh step, and the 10th step. So I fall asleep at night without doing a 10th step, so I do it first thing in the morning. I'm married. I have 3 children, and I am a real alcoholic. Like, I really like to drink. I'm incredibly pleased to be here because I know that speaking at Alcoholics Anonymous means that it's likely that I will stay sober today, and that matters to me today. I also am greatly pleased to be here because it's quite frankly been the thing I've been looking forward to most this week. Despite all of life, like, I really do love being of service in Alcoholics Anonymous, and I couldn't have told you that when I came in 18 years ago. I'm also incredibly pleased because I know I'm dressed up. I don't dress like this every single day, and I haven't actually been in a suit for a year, and I was incredibly pleased when I put it on and it fit. So, like, this has been, like, really good for my ego already. I just have to say that. So my story, what it was like, what happened, and what it's like now. So I was born and raised in the Chicago suburbs, northwest suburbs, a place called Hoffman Estates. My parents tried their best. They really did love me. They made plenty of mistakes, and they'd be the first to admit it. There is alcoholism in my family. I feel like at this point in time, if we had a family reunion, it would qualify as some sort of world conference. I have, family members that are sober everywhere from 40 some odd years down to just a few couple of years. And I'm glad to be part of that legacy now. Growing up, if you were to ask me by about the age of my oldest, who's in 6th grade right now, like, what is your mantra in life? It would be, what is wrong with you? What is wrong with you? What's wrong with you? I mean, I can't tell you how many times I heard that over and over and over again in my life. And I was a rambunctious kid. I was a bit of a spaz. I was hyperactive. Had a lot going on, right? So, and there I am sitting in Catholic school, and I was a round peg that did not fit in the square hole. And so my parents were going to get me involved in athletics because then I could make friends and learn how to act right, and I sucked at that, too. I was terrible at every athletic that they ever put me in. And I was just an awkward kid who was lonely, who didn't have any friends, who was, quite frankly, hearing an awful lot, like, what's wrong with you? And that talk about, like, just an absolute dry tinder for alcohol to hit. Thankfully, it did not hit me very early. I fell into something else, which was when I was in 7th grade, I figured out that I could make myself feel okay if I was successful. So I went from being a kid that literally failed 6th grade to getting straight A's. I fell into a sport that I was just, frankly, naturally gifted at, and I was just good at it. And it was like people started telling me, like, instead of hearing what's wrong with you, I started hearing, like, wow, you're really something. And actually, it's funny, I read it in Bill's story in one of the books that are available, that he talks about deciding that he's going to carve an Aboriginal boomerang, be the first Westerner to ever done that. And when he did that, his grandfather looked at him and told him, boy, Billy, you're really something else. And I related to that. I only wanted people's admiration and praise, and I only felt like I could earn it by being better than all of you. So all of you were competing with me all the time. You just didn't know it. Like, I was constantly fighting against you, and you had no idea, but damn it, I was going to win. And I was going to win at all costs. I really had no morals, quite frankly, in 8th grade, right? And so, but from the outside, he's getting good grades, he's good in sports. You add the fact that if I had a girlfriend, well, now I'm extra validated, and then if I had 2 and they didn't know about each other, how much better is that? I mean, it was like, oh my gosh, I would do anything to feel better. And so what happened is I was successful, and I went off to college, and I purposefully chose a major that I heard was the hardest one, because F you, I can do it. right? And I chose a school where there were people who were Olympic athletes in my event because you know what, F you, I can do it. And as it turned out, I wasn't very good at that major, and I wasn't a world-class Olympic athlete, and I started to fail. I started to fail again, and I started hearing the question, what's wrong with you? And I can distinctly remember what happened. Now, I haven't talked about me drinking up to this point. I had sips of beer, as I've mentioned. There was plenty of alcohol in my family, but the thing was I was so afraid that alcohol was going to keep me away from what I needed that I was scared of it because I saw how it affected people in my family. But the moment that I didn't have that anymore, I distinctly remember I went to the guy that lived next door to me in the dorm. So this is my February in the middle of Illinois of roughly mid-90s, and I went into his dorm room and I explained to him how bad I was feeling, just how miserable I felt. And he looked at me and he said, it sounds like you need to get drunk. And up until that point, I had thought to myself, that is the thing that's going to keep me from feeling validated, from getting what I need. And in that moment, I just didn't want to feel like there was something wrong with me anymore. I mean, even when I was succeeding, I still felt like I did not have an it's okay button. I never had a reset button installed. And so I gave it the old college try. I thought, you know what? Seems like a wise man. Let me see what you got. And so I mixed some powdered Gatorade with some whiskey, and I drank it until I got absolutely drunk. And it was a wonderful, amazing feeling. I got to take a vacation from feeling like there was something wrong with me. And I went back to my dorm room. I stripped down to my boxer shorts, I passed out in my bed, and somebody pulled the fire alarm. So I end up drunk outside in central Illinois in my boxer shorts, and I gotta tell you, I felt great. Like, it was like probably 20 degrees out, everybody else is wearing coats, and I am there in a pair of flip-flops and underwear like, where's the party? Like, I feel so good. And it immediately set me up on a pattern of trying to control my drinking and trying to remain clothed, both of which became a problem over the course of my drinking. Like, I was a guy that I was going to get absolutely dry. I did not go out to have a couple of drinks. I was going out to get absolutely loaded. And I probably was going to end up in my underwear somewhere just because I was that guy, and I just didn't care. So when I say I started drinking, so I woke up, and I distinctly remember, I woke up, and I was like, I'm okay. I can still go to class, I can still study, I can still go to practice. And I remember thinking to myself, you know what, that felt so good that I'm going to make sure that I control that and do that when I need it. And I'll probably need to do that about, I randomly said, I'll allow myself to do that once a semester, go out and get that drunk. So I'm just going to, once a semester. So the next Friday, I am absolutely loaded because I felt like I needed it again. And that was my first failed attempt at controlling my drinking. And I wish that I had this amazing drunk-a-log, and I don't. I did most of my drinking was pretty pathetic. A lot of it was college drinking. I remember the perfect drunk, which happened at the White Horse Bar and Saloon in Champaign, Illinois, and there was somebody had put on the jukebox. They had put on the Dark Side of the Moon Pink Floyd album. I was drunk. The room was spinning. The girl I liked was here. I had told my other girlfriend that I was only going to have one, so I bought a pitcher and put a straw in it, and so that was my one, and so I had that there, and it was the night. It was the night that I would then chase for the next 5 or 6 years, trying to achieve that perfect level of drunkenness that I just quite frankly never achieved again. While I was in college, my father unexpectedly came down with cancer, and within 3 months he was dead. And that sent me on a tailspin of alcoholism and grief that I can't explain. There's actually periods of my life that I just don't remember, and I don't know if it was because I was drinking or if it was just grief, quite frankly. as a result of it, some people took notice of what was going on in my life and said, listen, you need to get some mental help. So I went to a psychologist. She told me that I had to deal with my grief. I figured one visit with a psychologist felt like it was enough. I felt much better after that, and so I stopped going. I did end up on some medications for some heart issues that popped up during this time in my life. So there's like a lot going on. And all I remember is, at the end of about a 6-month period, coming out of something, whether it was an alcoholic blur or I don't know what it was, and going, I have to stop this. And so for the next 6 months, I rededicated my life to succeeding again. And what happened was, at the end of 6 months, I had made Dean List, I was all conference, I was in a stable relationship again with a stable person, because that was the other thing. I wasn't picking overly stable people. And at the end of that, the way I celebrated was I decided to go out with my guy friends, and one night I got absolutely drunk and did something that to this day I regret. And just like that, it happened again. And this is after 6 months of not drinking. So I graduate from college and I figure, okay, the party is over. I can't drink like that anymore. Nobody drinks like that after. I mean, nobody, once you turn 21, life is over, and nobody drinks like I drank after that. And I moved to the one place that I was pretty sure nobody drank, San Francisco. And I had a job, and I moved there in the middle of the dot-com boom. And the way I would describe San Francisco in the middle of dot-com boom is like if you had walked into my dorm and just dumped a bunch of money and said, here, have fun. And so that's what happened. I started in my working career, and I immediately started my pattern of trying to out-succeed everybody, right? And it was almost 6 months to the day that, I almost had a mental breakdown. And the reason why I bring this stuff up, the reason why I think it matters, is because when you took away the alcohol from me in Alcoholics Anonymous, had I not worked the steps, and had I not addressed that, I would have ended up homicidal or suicidal. And I know for a fact, given my pattern, that had I not changed the person who I was, that I could not stay sober and be happy and be in a relationship and stand here in front of you today. I know that more so than anything, and I have plenty of proof in my life. So I moved to San Francisco, and I went 6 months without drinking. And I literally remember the night that I started drinking again. There was a place called Frankie's on Divisadero. It was within walking distance. My eye had gotten so wound tight and jittery that my roommate said, I just think you need to go for a drink. And I'm like, fine, let's just go for a drink. Let's just go for a drink. And I walked over to Frankie's, and I got absolutely, completely loaded. And I went back, and I got that immediate sense of release. I got that couple-hour vacation that I was looking for, which was absolutely what I needed in order to survive. Because again, for me, without alcoholism, I was a very sick man who needed help, and alcohol was my solution, quite frankly. That started me on a pattern of my drinking. Now, I really believe that I could have remained at that level of drinking until I met, the one. Now, I've had about 9 the ones in my lifetime, but I was pretty sure she was the one. We met her, my roommate and I met her because she accidentally passed out in our apartment. We came home one day to find her sprawled on our floor, and we knew that she lived in our building. And I remember my roommate saying, that's really sad, and me thinking, yeah, but she's really hot. And so we walked her home, and that was how we became introduced, and I started dating her. And she had a rule. She said, I will date you. However, you have to drink with me. You cannot hang out with me if I am drinking, unless you are drinking too. And I drink almost every night. And she lived in my building, and my drinking went from being sort of a part-time obsession to my hobby. And I can distinctly recall, again, having a job that I had no business having. I had absolutely no business having this job. Most of the people that had this job had 20 or 30 years on me in terms of their careers, and I was incredibly lucky, which is the story of my life up to this point. I've had a number of incredibly lucky things happen to me, and I just remember on a Friday not being able to go to work because I needed to sit on the corner of Sutter and Steiner and drink myself for several hours. And that's just what I needed to do. And so I figured out, during this period of time, I started to realize just how unhappy I was. Because alcohol, while it gave me a vacation from feeling like, what's wrong with you, it didn't fix the underlying unhappiness. And so I started evaluating every single part of my life. I started working out. I started seeing another psychologist. And when I was drinking, what I learned about psychology is it's really expensive. That was about it. When I say that now, having been sober, I find tremendous value in getting extra help for myself outside of the steps. But back then, I just couldn't be honest. I just couldn't tell somebody what was going on with me. I started going to church. Everything that eventually would become part of the solution just wasn't working for me because I hadn't quit drinking and I didn't really understand the nature of my disease. So I end up, here's how weird my life was. Again, I lived in what is considered one of the greatest cities in the world. And 2 years after living there, I would have told you it was one of the worst cities in the world. The people are all phony. It was a bunch of crap. There was nothing to do there. It was a terrible place to live. And I rarely left a 4-block radius. So I live in one of the greatest cities in the world. I have plenty of opportunity. And I rarely left the path between my house and Frankie's. In fact, that place was an absolute dump. We literally lived across the street from a housing project, and the sorts of stuff, like we didn't have a TV, but we had these bay windows, and on Friday nights we'd open it up and just sit back and be like, this is going to be good. And we would just watch stuff happen. That's how bad our neighborhood was. And even my roommates were like, how come nobody messes with us? And they all say, well, they kind of figure like, if we live in this neighborhood, what's wrong with us? And I'm like, yeah, whatever. Like, this is great. It's like having cable. And so, that was the life I was living. But I couldn't leave because I knew if I moved, I was going to have to drive to Frankie's. And so I couldn't move out of my just hole of an apartment because I wasn't going to be able to walk to Frankie's. And so I found another bar. And I'm like, well, now I can move, right? And so I found the Irish 32 on Cary Street. And I'm like, oh, well, now I can move. And so I moved to be closer to my bar that I like to go to at that point in time. And again, my life had gotten incredibly dark. What I will say is at this point in my drinking is the stuff that morally degraded me. The stuff that I felt disgusting about the next day started to happen. Where I just couldn't take enough showers. And I don't know if you've ever felt that way, where my soul was dirty and there was not enough detergent, or I couldn't take a long enough shower to make myself feel better. And what happened was I went out with my roommates and my former roommate. I had an incident with my roommate and somebody that was sort of related to one of my bosses. And I woke up the next morning having had one of those morally repugnant moments. I was not clothed. She was not clothed. My roommate was moving out. And I was wearing a dog collar. And I didn't own a dog. It was a really, really, really weird night. And I have no idea what happened. And I am not making any of that up. This stuff happened to me. And I'm like, this has gotten really weird. And so it was within probably a couple weeks of that I hit my bottom. And my bottom was I went out with a couple of buddies, and we went to an Humphrey McGee's show, and probably for maybe the second time in my life, I just couldn't get drunk enough. And so I tried to smoke a bunch of weed in order to just accent my drunkenness, and nothing seemed to be working. I popped off to one of my friends, who was a gentleman who was deeply involved in the early days of UFC, and I made some comments about him, and my night ended with him kicking in the door of my apartment building, kicking in the door of my apartment to get at me, and him holding me down and threatening to kill me, my girlfriend breaking up with me, and the roommate who had first moved out several weeks earlier saying, I can no longer be around you. I cannot deal with you anymore. And so I woke up the morning of Saturday, July 13th, feeling absolutely disgusting. And I had a weird phenomenon when I drank. I would get delayed hangover. So if I drank really hard on Friday, and probably because I would drink so deep into Friday night, Saturday morning, that I wouldn't normally get hungover until Sunday, which just seemed incredibly unfair because it meant I couldn't get drunk on Saturday and go to work on Monday. And so I got super drunk on that Friday. That Saturday I woke up, I'm feeling fine. Sunday morning I wake up and I am absolutely worst hangover of my life. And I'm laying in bed and I have to tell you that my bottom was me laying in that bed. Now I had neighbors and they had a Rottweiler, and that dog they would leave on the weekends and just leave him out with some food, and this dog would bark all weekend long. So I wake up on Sunday morning with a Rottweiler, and we were on the second floor, and the Rottweiler was obviously on the sort of the outside of this apartment building, and this dog is barking, and it sounds like it's in my ear, and I've got just a raging hangover. And I started evaluating my life, and I realized that I was miserable, I was alone, my friends didn't want to talk to me anymore, I felt disgusting, I still had a broken door that I had to figure out how I was going to fix on this Sunday, and I laid there and I started praying to God to kill me. It was a very honest prayer. I was 25 years old, and I just wanted to die, quite frankly. I really wanted to die. And I remember lying there and and it sounds ridiculous, but I've got, if there's some way that I don't have the guts to kill myself, can you kill me? Can you throw an earthquake where the building collapses on me and it just tilt it right so you take out that effing dog. Just me and the dog, just take us both out, right? There's just got to be a way that you can kill us both. And then I thought, oh, wait a minute. Gee, you know what? If you kill me that quick, no one's going to have a chance to come by and apologize to me. Okay, wait a minute. Okay, God. So here's the deal. I want you to kill me, but can you give me cancer like you did my dad so that everyone that owes me an apology can line up on my deathbed and tell me how sorry they are for how they've treated me in my life. And I know it sounds dramatic, but that is, if I had $1 million in that moment, I would have paid for a slow death. And I really, really, really meant it. And in that moment, I had a God moment where there was a voice in my head and it said, whoa, 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 calm down. You felt this way before. There was that time you went drinking and such happened. And then, that turned out fine. And then there was that other time where you were like, hey, you went out drinking and you and your buddies did this. You ended up driving around in the Tenderloin and this happened and that happened. And then you did this and then you felt disgusting and that turned out okay. And then there was that time that you went out drinking and all of a sudden it clicked. Oh my God, every time I've felt this way, I've been drinking. I just need to quit drinking. And in a moment's flash, I was like, that's it. I'm going to quit drinking. And that I won't feel this way again. And then there was a voice inside my head that said, and maybe it's just self-talk. I don't know. It's yeah, you know what? There was that time you quit in college where you were never going to drink again and you made it 6 months and then you were drunk. And then there was that time when you started working where you were going to give it up for a year and you made it 6 months and then you were drunk. And then there was that time that you were going to quit drinking for Lent and you made it a week and then you were drunk. And I just realized I have had zero luck at that point quitting drinking. So I did something that was incredibly inspired for me. I went over to the Yellow Pages, which really ages me, and I looked for the number for Alcoholics Anonymous, and I called, and I got a woman. The woman picked up. Her name was Tina. Said, "Hello, this is Tina. Can I help you?" And I said, "Yes." I said, "I need to go to a meeting," and I really mean it when I say this. My moment of humility only lasted about 3 minutes. From the time that I had that self-conversation to the time that I got on the phone to the time that Tina's talking to me. Because the moment, it was almost at that moment exactly, that my ego went up and all of a sudden I'm becoming incredibly defensive. And I don't know why I only got those 3 minutes of clarity, and I don't know why it worked out this way. And I really do believe it was a God thing. But so I said to Tina, I said, "Hi, hi Tina, I need to go to a meeting." And she said, "Well, what kind of meeting?" And this is why I said, I was just incredibly an arrogant a-hole. And I'm like, "Well, Tina, this is the Alcoholics Anonymous hotline. I'd like to go to an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting." And she kind of snipped back at me. She's like, "Well, would you like to go to a big book meeting? Or would you like to go to a young person's meeting? Or would you like to go to..." And I had no idea what she's talking about. And I said, "Tina, I have no idea. This is my first meeting. and her voice softened. And she said, oh, well, where do you live? And I thought to myself, oh, Jesus, I can't tell anybody that. Like, I don't need Tina coming to my house to drag me to a meeting. Like, that's the last thing I need. So I gave her an address like 3 streets over. And she was like, well, hey, there's a meeting at the hospital, which is, walking distance from your house on California Street. How about I meet you there? And I said to myself, all right, I'll meet you there. Now, this happened around 8:30. The meeting started at 8 o'clock. So I get out of bed, I get dressed, and I start reading the paper, I start hanging out, and I'm like, I look at the time, it's like 9:45, and I'm thinking to myself, boy, that meeting starts in 15 minutes. Holy Christ, I almost ended up in an AA meeting. Holy cow. Boy, that was an overcorrection. And I just remember thinking, well, God, Tina, God, I'm going to feel bad if she's there at the meeting by herself and nobody else is there and it's just her and all those weirdos. Like, I'm going to go, but I'm going to go for Tina because I feel bad if I don't show up. So I walked over to California Street, and I'm looking for the hospital and the room, and I'm pretty sure that, I'm looking for a small group of people. And I walked into the cafeteria, which would have been about 4 or 5 times the size. There was 150 people, and most of them under the age of 30. And I walked in there, and I thought, this is not what I expected this to be. And a gentleman by the name of Sammy the stockbroker got up, and he told his story. So one of the weird parts of my story is that everybody in San Francisco seems to have a nickname. And at the time, I worked in women's healthcare, so they referred to me as Birth Control Matthew. And then I won a sales competition, and I drove around San Francisco in a Segway, so I was also known as Segway Matthew. So those were my 2 nicknames. But Sammy the stockbroker got up, and Sammy started his share by saying 2 things that absolutely, I believe, saved my life. Sammy absolutely saved my life, and because he began his share by saying, welcome to Alcoholics Anonymous. It doesn't matter why you're in that chair. It doesn't matter how high your bottom was or how low your bottom was. You belong here, and I'm glad you're here. And the reason why I needed to hear that is because I'm sitting in that chair thinking, what's wrong with me? What is wrong with me? And here's somebody saying welcome. And because I was pretty sure, I looked around that room, not everybody was clean cut. Not everybody smelled good. Not everybody, there were some people there that was right out of the streets because they had bagels at that meeting. I thought to myself, my story doesn't look like it. I know my story doesn't look like theirs. And so I immediately felt like I kind of didn't belong because I started comparing. But when Sammy said that, he really meant it. He was incredibly sincere, and it made all the difference in my life. And then the second thing that he said ended that debate in my mind. Because Sammy said, if you think you have a problem with drugs and alcohol, he said, you do. He said, normal people don't ever have to ask themselves that question. And I heard that. And I said to myself, man, that guy's full of shit. But I looked around the room, and again, there's 150 people, and they were all doing the AA head nod, like, And I was like, oh, maybe he's not lying. Like, maybe other people think this way. And I at that meeting, Tina grabbed me, and I was sweating, and I for whatever reason, like, I didn't want to tell anyone. I didn't think I would be invited there if I only had stopped drinking like a day ago. So Tina asked me, like, how much time do you have? And I was like, 4 days. So I had like 2 days, and I'm like, I'm in Alcoholics Anonymous all of about 3 minutes before I'm lying, just to put in perspective of who I am. And so she gave me a sponsor. His name was Victor. She gave me a big book, and I don't remember paying for it. And Victor said, meet me at this meeting here. We're going to meet. And I remember saying, meet me at the Lutheran church. I said, I can't go there. I'm Catholic. He's like, dude, none of that matters. Like, you really don't know anything about this. Like, just come to the meeting and meet me there. And so I went there and I met Victor. And then my story gets interesting. And I apologize that it's taken me this long to get to the good part of my story, because sobriety has been by far the most interesting and adventurous parts of my life. And so what's interesting about my sobriety is that I came into Alcoholics Anonymous, and for the first 8 months, I had a number of different sponsors, so having me as a sponsee for a very long time meant that you were going to move unknowing to you when you took me on as a sponsee, or you were going to get drunk. And so my very first, so I don't remember what happened with Victor. I think he got drunk. And so I got Pat C as my sponsor. And Pat C kind of had his own ideas about the big book and how you're supposed to work the steps. I don't know any better. I'm like 30 days sober, and I'm just an absolute, like, no idea. And so I start working the steps with Pat, and I go home to Chicago to visit my family. I get a call one night from Pat, and he's drunk, and he's going to kill himself. And this is, again, at this point, I probably got 4 months sober. And this is, again, like, Pat calls me, and I had just done my very first fourth and fifth step. And Pat calls me, he's like, and he's slurring his words, and he's drunk, and all I can think about is, crap, I'm going to have to do a fifth step with somebody else. Like, what about me, Pat? Like, no offense, dude, but, like, come on, man. And he's crying to me on the phone, and I'm like, oh, Pat, super sorry. So, like, hang up with him. Like, I start dialing, looking for other guys to be my sponsor. So I went through, just like I said, a series of sponsors who drank or moved. And throughout this entire time, there was one part of my story that I didn't believe that I was an alcoholic in the depths of my soul. Now, I didn't drink because I kept coming to meetings. But the thing was, I would hear guys get up like me, and they would share their story, and they would say, growing up, I felt like this. And I would think to myself, oh my God, those are crazy thoughts. And I remember thinking that way. And they would say, I think like this. I go, oh my God, I think like that. And when I drank like this. I go, oh, sweet goodness, I drank like that. And they'd say, so I end up smoking crack under the bridge in San Francisco. I'm like, Jesus, I'm not like that guy, And the thing was, I didn't realize that is why it is important for me to share on the front end of my story, is like how I felt and what my drinking looked like, because there were parts of my story that I'm sure none of you can identify with. But when I really learned to identify with people's feelings, I started to feel like I fed in. At one point in time, Pat, right before he got drunk and right before I went to Chicago, said, I'm tired of hearing about whether or not you're an alcoholic. He's like, why don't you just write down 10 things that you did that you think are alcoholic, and then I'll tell you whether or not you're an alcoholic. And I thought to myself, well, screw him. Like, I went down and it took me 2 minutes. I wrote 10 things, and Pat, there's the 10 things. And he looked at that, and then he started judging. He was like, oh, Jesus, you got a problem. I said, yeah, darn right I do. And as much as that sounds ridiculous, and it's not part of the story, part of like the steps, that's, if you're listening, that's not step one. But for me, it's what it took. And I have to say that I actually got to experience step one about 7 years into sobriety, because I never thought that I had experienced cravings. And if you actually read in the book, it says, this phenomenon of craving is basically only to the alcoholics. Well, I work in sales, and so I was at a sales conference that happened to be in Vegas. And one night, a friend of mine went out, and I ordered some soup. And they brought the soup to the table, and I ate the soup. I'm like, this is amazing soup. And I said, just to check, is there any alcohol in this soup? And they're like, no, there's no alcohol in this soup. You're fine. Oh, they're fine. I ate the soup. And I'm like, this soup. This was the best soup I think I had ever had. And so I wake up the next morning. We have another sales meeting that starts about 7 a.m. My friend and I, we meet at 6 a.m. at the same diner. We had dinner the night before. And it's like 6 a.m. I'm like, hey, do you have any of that French onion soup? Like, do you have any of that soup? And they're like, well, yeah, we have some leftover soup. We'll warm it up for you. I'm like, yeah, that sounds really, really, really good. And my buddy looks at me and goes, that is weird. Did you want French onion soup for breakfast? And I stopped and I said, I'm sorry, will you check and make sure that there's no alcohol in that soup? And they come back, and sure enough, that soup was made with red wine that really hadn't cooked off. And I sat back and I thought to myself, holy moly. If you had asked me if I had ever experienced cravings, I would have looked you dead in the eye and told you I do not experience cravings. And 7 years later, I am jonesing for a bowl of French onion soup, like nothing you have ever seen, at 6 a.m. in the morning in a Las Vegas diner. And that is when I'm like, I get it. I am powerless. If I put alcohol in my body, I am going to crave it, and it is going to feel wonderful at that time. And I need to be honest with myself about that. My second step, I think I mentioned I was raised Catholic, so I believed in this idea of God. But I don't think I really started to understand the depths of spirituality until I had some time in the program. What happened for me is that when I sat down and started doing my fourth step, there was a place, again, it was on the corner of Divisadero and California that made crepes and it made eggs. And I would go there every Sunday morning, and I would try to knock off a piece of my fourth step. And I would sit there, and I had a notebook and a pen and the columns, and I would put down a truth. And then I would sit there, and I couldn't go forward. Like I couldn't look at that anymore. And that's when I learned the third step. I learned that I needed the third step to do the fourth step, because I couldn't have gotten through that fourth step without really believing that I was going to be okay, despite the fact that that ink was on the page. And so I learned the third step by doing the fourth step. I've done a number of fifth steps. I eventually did my first full fifth step with a sponsor who did not drink or move immediately afterwards, with a guy by the name of Eric, who currently lives in Atlanta. He was living in San Francisco at the time. And Eric was one of the cool guys. It's one of the reason why I chose Eric to be my sponsor. He was young and hip, and he was a tech exec, and he just had something that I wanted. He looked confident in his own skin, and I wanted to feel confident in my own skin. And we went out to Chrissy Fields, and I read my fifth step to him, and I even remember that there was a couple things on there that, again, you have to remember at this point in time, I've probably had, my first sponsor drank, my second sponsor fired me, my third sponsor disappeared, I had all this stuff happen. And by this point in time, I've probably done 5 fifth steps, and I'm at the end of, year 2. And I get down to this point, and I'm so fed up with the fifth step at this point. I'm not scared of it, I'm just done with it. And so I just sat down, and I'm like, oh yeah, well I did this, and I did this, and I did this, and I did this. And there was no more shame in saying it, because I felt like I'd had enough practice at that point. And Eric shared with me some things that he did that were around some of my more shameful things as well. And all of a sudden, I really did feel like I was a part of Alcoholics Anonymous. Now, because I'm Catholic, I thought, well, that's not enough. I got to go do this with a priest. And so I made an appointment at a church on the other side of town. And I went in, and I'm like, listen, Father, clunk, you got something to listen to this. All right, page 1. And I started reading through this. And at the end of that meeting, I floated down the steps of those stairs. I felt as light as I ever have been in my entire life. And there was nothing that I said that shocked him, and I felt incredibly unjudged, and I just felt closer to God, and I get it. Now, I'm going to fast forward in my story a little bit, because I do end up moving. By the way, my sponsors consistently move. Eric moved. I will say that, Eric, for me, is the epitome of what a perfect sponsor is. And what I mean by that is there's a moment in my life that epitomizes what a perfect sponsor does for me, which is that, as I mentioned, everybody had nicknames in San Francisco. And at this particular point in time, I had decided that it was going to be a really good idea for me to get into a relationship with the woman whose nickname was Angry Maria. And I just want you to imagine, in a room full of alcoholics, if you are the angry one, what that means. And so and I remember it's about 10:30 at night, and Maria is on her way over. I haven't told my sponsor that this is what's going to be going on, but I'm going to start my relationship with Maria that evening. And I call Eric, and he's kind of sleepy, and I'm like, hey, dude, I just want to let you know, Ang Maria is on her way over, and we're going to start a relationship. And he said, oh, that's great. And I said, really? I thought you were going to tell me that this was a bad idea. And I had every argument lined up as to why this was a good idea and why I was ready and why this was it. And Eric said to me, he said, oh, it's a tremendously bad idea. He said, but I'm so tired of listening to your usual bullshit, at least this is going to be interesting. And then he hung up on me. And then I immediately was like, you know what, this might be a bad idea. And then I called Angry Maria, and I was like, hey, you know what, this might be a bad idea. And then I found out why they called her Angry Maria. But that's exactly what I needed. For me, sponsorships are guides. They don't tell me what to do. They show me the steps. They lay the spiritual toolkit out at my feet. And then I choose to pick them up or not. And that has really made a difference in my lifetime, including taking me through the book, including teaching me the steps, which is where I want to jump to in my story. So I moved to North Carolina. I was transferred here for a job. We absolutely had a hard time moving here. Moving in sobriety has been the hardest thing I've done. I mean, I've lost loved ones. I've lost jobs. I've gotten married, I've had kids, and the hardest thing I've ever had to do is move in sobriety, because you did it wrong, you had funny accents. I remember I went to one of my very first meetings, and I said, I'm new here, and I don't know anyone, and I'm just looking for people to connect with. And there was a guy there who thought I was new to Alcoholics Anonymous, and he started to, well, you better do this, and you better do this, and enough being lonely, and you better do this. And at the end of the meeting, he got up and got a 9-month chip, and I'm like, Jesus, this guy's just a jerk. Congratulations. I'm judging him, and I'm like, God, this place sucks. And so I eventually did what they told me to. I got a sponsor and I started working the steps. Now, I moved here. My wife, we got married. We got pregnant, not necessarily in that order. And my wife, who is a member of this program, is an amazing person. She's incredibly generous and an amazing, and she's not great at being pregnant or breastfeeding. she gets pretty spicy. And so we were recently married, and I just remembered, oh my God, I've married the wrong person. And I've moved to North Carolina, and my life is spinning out of control. And I didn't really have a sponsor, and I wasn't really working the steps. And so I got a sponsor. I got so desperate that I made the 6:30 a.m. meeting my home group, which is like, that is how desperate I really was. And I remember for me, the first time I got exposed to the sixth step, I had about 7 years of sobriety. And what happened for me was incredible. I called my sponsor and I said, his name was Jeff, and I said, Jeff, this is what's going on in my life. And he said, have you tried praying? And I thought, well, that is a dumb idea. That can't work. That can't be the solution to this, because she is this and she is this and this is happening and the baby's colicky and this is happening. And he said, have you tried praying? And I thought, this is stupid. And I was so done. I had reached another bottom in sobriety with my own anger. I was blowing up all the time. And it got to the point where I blew up and I was blowing up every day. I was just so exhausted and so overdone. I was just overcooked. I was back to that stage of being what I talked about earlier, where I was that man again. I was just wound up and I was looking for a vacation from being me again. And my wife came in and I just thought to myself, I said, please, God, I prayed the most sincere prayer of my life, and it was, God, just help me not be a dick. Just help me not be a dick. And I say that was the most sincere prayer I think I've ever made. I just didn't want to blow up at her. And what happened was, about 2 days later, I blew up at her again. And I thought to myself, wait a minute, I've gone 2 days without doing that. What was the difference? And I started going back in my mind. I thought, holy cow. All I did was pray. That is the only thing that changed. And so I started experimenting with prayer in the sixth step and really trying to give up my defects and give them to God. And I started playing with it. And I found that if I really decided that I wanted to be a different person and I asked God for help, that it happened. And on the days that I didn't ask for that to happen, it didn't happen. That's just my experience. And so I began to understand it. My understanding of the sixth step changed even more around year 15, when again I started dealing with anger. And I started getting incredibly angry again and having issues. And again, at this point in time, we had the opportunity to start a company. And so I'm working all the time, and I'm frustrated. Again, I become the same man again. And I talked to my sponsor, and my sponsor shared something that was absolutely incredible, and it made all the difference. He said to me, if you are willing to try to be perfect, that God does not expect you to succeed, but God will help you. And I, up to that point, had always been about a just enough guy. I wanted to give up my anger, but only so much. I wanted to give up my greed, but only so much. I wanted to give up this, but only so much. But when you really looked at the literature, and I really looked at my sponsors who had what I wanted, for them, it was like, no, we really are going to try to be perfect. We are never going to get there, but we're going to try. And I had never heard that in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. I know it's in the literature. I absolutely know it's in the literature, but I'd never heard anyone talk like that. And it absolutely changed my life. It absolutely changed my life. The last thing I want to share is one of my greatest God moments in Alcoholics Anonymous, which is that I was 3 years sober. I was recently out of a relationship, and it was one of those relationships that ends incredibly bad. And it was with another woman in Alcoholics Anonymous. And it's funny, my sponsor at the time, Andrew P., had related to me hey, listen, and again, I can say this because I'm married to another alcoholic, but he's dating an Alcoholics Anonymous is like marrying an Alcoholics Anonymous is like watching two garbage trucks collide in the middle of the night, right? Because you'll spend the rest of the night arguing over whose garbage is whose. And that defined that relationship for me perfectly. That was the best analogy of that relationship. And so, and it ended so poorly that it was like one of those ones where I got my stuff back in a box with no note. And I was like, oh, this is bad. And I ended up immediately after that out in the woods. I love to hike the mountains. And I got a bout of anger like nothing I could ever believe. And my sponsor I remember telling me right before I left on this trip, my sponsor said, when you come back, we're going to be working on your anger. And I remember thinking to myself, I'm not an angry guy. I have no idea what he's talking about. And there I am in the woods, and all of a sudden, all the feelings I had been stuffing. And there was this guy, Theater Joe, who was so fond of looking at me and telling me, don't worry about getting in touch with your feelings. They'll be getting in touch with you real soon. And I just remember being on the trail and being so incredibly angry that I just picked up the stick and just started beating this tree because I was so angry and crying like I had never cried before. And that was, I think God put me on that path when I had that, because had I been anywhere else, I think I would have I could have harmed someone. I was just out of my mind. And that night, I hike off the mountain into this little campground, and on my way back out the next morning, I go to try to hike out, and I take a wrong turn. I end up on this little side path, and there's a shiny thing, and I bend down, and there in the middle of the path is a 4-year AA chip, which was my upcoming birthday. And on one side it said 4 years, and on the other side it said, rarely have we seen someone fail who's thoroughly followed our path. And I thought, and this is, I'm literally 80 miles from anywhere else. And I thought to myself, this is, oh my God, I can't wait to get back and tell my sponsor. And then I'm like, Jesus, I got to walk for 4 days before that happens. So I hit the trail and went back, and I called my sponsor. He's like, see, you are being taken care of. You are absolutely being taken care of. And so again, if you are new here, if you have been here for a while like myself and you're wondering, does this thing really work? Is my life changing? All I can say is if you're like me, find a sponsor that has experience working the steps. Like I said, I could not meditate. When I came into Alcoholics Anonymous, I was so jittery and shaking. And at the end of San Francisco meetings, the speaker gets the choice of deciding what prayer they're going to pray. And I just remember not being able to stand still long enough to say the Lord's Prayer. If they chose the Lord's Prayer, it's because I wanted the Serenity Prayer because it's quick and I didn't have to stand there that long holding people's hands. I just wanted to go. And this morning, I spent 15 minutes in silence, 5 minutes of it in prayer, 10 minutes focusing on my breath, 5 minutes focusing on an AA reading from a guy that couldn't stand still for the Lord's Prayer. And so again, I am incredibly thankful to this program. I'm incredibly thankful for all of you for being here for my sobriety. And again, thank you, Courtney, for inviting me to do this. Thank you all.